Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
All right, kia ora, good evening. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Duncan Garner. Good to have you along this evening. It is a special, of course. It's Budget 2025. What was in it? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you here. There wasn't a hell of a lot. This is a classic National Party mid-term budget. So they've tried to be a bit of all things to all people, and they've got a little bit here, there and everywhere, and it's a bit of a sort of fudged budget. Is there anything big and shiny that stands out? I don't think so, but we will talk about this. There's a few changes around Kiwisaver. So to join me tonight is Ashley Church, commentator, and of course Stuart Nash, former Labour Party Minister and MP. They join me now to discuss this, kick around the issues. The A-Team panel, the best panel in the podcast business. Nice to have you on, gents. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Ashley, what do you make of it? I know you guys have both gone over this with the full resources of your offices. Now, what do you reckon, Ashley? What do you make of it?
Well, look, I was expecting much bigger surprises, so not a lot in this that's surprising. I think for me, because there's been a lot of emphasis already on the so-called slash and burn and the cutting and what have you, this is not a budget that cuts. In fact, it's interesting. I was looking at some numbers just a few seconds ago regarding what Robertson was proposing to spend in this year, and if he'd still been in power. And in terms of core expenditure, or core government expenditure, he was proposing to spend 184 billion. Willis is actually spending 191. So this is not a cut. This is actually an increase.
Yes.
Interesting too to look at the debt position. This is not about slashing spending. It's more about reallocating spending from basically robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Correct.
There's some really interesting stuff in there. Won't talk too much about the pay equity stuff because that's already been canvassed, other than to say that's not about taking money out of the mouths of young women. It's about money that was allocated as a provision for claims that might have been made going forward. So it's basically reducing that. And I'm sure Stuart will talk about a few more of these. The one that stood out for me were things like means testing mums and dads for 18 and 19-year-olds that were unemployed.
Good.
Probably a good move.
Yeah.
And debt at 185 billion, which is 42.7% of GDP, increasing rather than reducing to 238 billion by 2029, which is 45% of GDP. So I mention all those figures not because they're particularly significant, other than simply to point out that this is not about reducing spending. It's about reallocating spending into what this government thinks is more important areas.
Yeah, no, well said. I think, and Stu, I'll just address some of the points there in my questions to you. But I think that this is what she said, what Nicola Willis said, is this is the sort of budget you have when you're not doing austerity. So they've taken $5 billion of cuts and changes to priorities, and they haven't just put it in their back pocket. They've gone and spent it on things that they now prioritise. They're getting rid of things like the Best Start payment to wealthy families. So we're not paying wealthy families to have kids. Makes sense. And also, we will not pay the Kiwisaver annual contribution to anyone earning over $180,000. Probably they're saving enough anyway. So your take, Stu?
I don't think it's a particularly good budget, Duncan. The reason I say that is by virtue of the fact that the Minister of Finance came out and said there's not much money for the government to spend here. So by virtue of that, she's leaving it up to the private sector to grow productivity and the economy. So business, the private sector, I think we're expecting something a bit bigger than this. Keep in mind, Chris Luxon came into this job on the back of the fact that he was the CEO of Air New Zealand. He knew how to run one of our biggest companies, therefore he knows how to run the country. This has proven he doesn't. Their flagship economic policy was a 20% capital expenditure. That means you can claim that off the cost of an asset. Now, the business community has been calling for an accelerated depreciation regime or a capital expensing regime. Now, I don't want to get too technical because it quickly dives down into technical economics, but the bottom line is we do not spend enough money on assets that grow productivity. This will not change that at all. What the Minister of Finance has said for her flagship policy is this is going to increase GDP by 1% over 20 years or 0.5% over 5 years. That's about as much as they're spending on defence. If you're in the business community, and if you are looking for something, if you're looking for an incentive to buy that capital asset, to buy that piece of kit or machinery to drive productivity and growth, you will be sorely disappointed.
You've got extra costs today as well because you have to put in 4% to your each and every employee's Kiwisaver account. So you go from 3 to 4. It is over 3 years. God, it's as yes, they're meddling again with Kiwisaver and they're taking things off people. So the government's taken back its contribution by half. okay? And they're making everybody else put in more. So more from the employer, more from the worker. That's a minimum what we need to do in savings, Ashley. We need to do a hell of a lot more. We're so far behind, and I think we need to be more brutal about this. They're not doing any fundamental changes to retirement savings at all. The problem remains.
No, they're not. They're not. There's a lot of psychology in this, though. So I look at that one, for example, and I think that was probably the maximum they could have done without causing too much angst. So the changes that they've made to Kiwisaver, I think, will be, in the scheme of things, they're relatively small. So most people would just accept them, and employers would just accept them. I want to come back, though, to Stu's comments, because I understand the point he's making. I'm a little bit more ambitious, though, for these changes to tax incentives. It's a 6.6 billion provision over 4 years. And yes, he's right. It is small. It probably needs to be larger. They've had to balance between measures that are going to get the budget back into surplus by 2029, while appearing to do stuff that's actually going to advantage the business sector. You could argue on the fringes as to whether it could have been a bit more or a bit less, but I think there's a psychological element to this, by which I mean that if businesses feel that the government's got their books under control, if they feel that they're doing something to help them with their spending so that they can spend more on capital investment, I think this will have an impact. The other interesting thing to point out, and those figures I gave you before from Grant Robertson are a really good indicator of it, although governments set these things in tranches of 4 years, the reality is that what it looks like in 4 years' time will not be the figures that have been currently quoted. They're really just sort of a trajectory so that Treasury's got some sort of handle on what's likely to happen to the economy over that time. So it will be interesting to see it over the next couple of years whether this change to tax depreciation rules has had an impact, and if so, whether the government's in a position to increase that and be a bit more generous.
I think we'll look back at this even by next week, even tomorrow potentially, and say that this is a hugely underwhelming and forgettable budget. It's going to be, we're spending all this money, and it's just to keep the lights on. The growth figures, and the outlook is questionable. They've done the minimum in everything basically, and I honestly think we'll find this really forgettable in time. I don't think there'll be a marker in time on this.
Look, I call this a business as usual budget in broken times. Look, if you're a parent out there with school kids, I love what Minister Stanton's doing in education, and she's got a lot of money for education. That's really, really good, and that's important. Health, they've announced they're going to rebuild Dunedin Nelson Hospital, and there's capital expenditure in there for that sort of thing. But Ashley's right, core expenditure. So this is what the government spends, goes from $139 billion in 2024 up to $162 billion. And when you said, Ashley, this is about the government getting its books under control, I don't know about that. I mean, there's some little niggly things. There was a fund in there where Sport New Zealand has these programs that gets young people into sport and recreation. They're cutting $3.8 million per annum out of that.
Why?
I mean, really? Duncan, I agree with you. Kiwisaver, I don't have a problem with that. Kiwis need to save because the government isn't going to, in years to come, we're running into trouble with that. If they've got $1 million sitting in their superannuation account when they're 65, all power to them, that's what they need. Yeah. But I'm with you. We heard all this really innovative stuff when they were in opposition. We're going to get spending under control. We're going to reorientate the economy. It's going to be so much better. This is underwhelming to the point where, this could be a Labor budget, but it probably would have been a little bit more friendly. It's a nothing budget, and I think
it's interesting you should say that, though, Duncan, because
the Prime Minister's been dented.
One aspect of this which is important is the comparison between this, and we'll all have different views on whether it's a good or a bad budget, the comparison between this and earlier this week Chloe's budget from the Greens.
Shocking.
And just the massive difference between...
Well, for a start, this government knows how to explain their budget. Chloe Swarbrick was so caught out. I reckon she was a bullshitter. She got caught out by Jack Tame.
She's done us a favour. She's done us a favour because by putting it out there the way she did, she's made a very, very sharp contrast. She's put a wedge completely down the middle of those two positions and made it really clear to Kiwis which way the country should go.
Actually, you know what? You are 100% right. That is the best marketing that National could have ever hoped for, because people are going to look at Chloe on that and go, bloody hell, if the Greens have their hands on the economic or social levers of policy of government, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So I don't know why Luxon, every time he's in any form of media, he doesn't go, well, if you get Labor, you get the Greens, and look what they're like. They're just
keep repeating that. But hold up, don't say anything. Hold up a picture of the three of them. Just hold up a picture. There's your best re-election strategy. Just pass around some pictures of the three of them together around the table, I reckon.
But what Nicholas said about this is there's going to be slower GDP growth, slower revenue because companies aren't going to make as much money.
Yeah.
it's we're
depressing.
in a little bit, as a country, we're in a little bit of trouble, right? There's a whole lot of global uncertainty, and we could have done things, the government could have done things that I think were fully costed, which could have driven productivity, could have driven economic growth in a way that took us up that ladder of small advanced economies. They missed a trick here, Duncan, and I don't quite get it. Nicola's not stupid.
Yeah.
I was waiting. I agree with Stu. I was waiting for some really big announcement.
Something shiny.
If you ask them, they'd probably argue that the 6.6 billion tax incentive for business was it. But I don't know that it is. I don't know that it's the thing that's going to resonate with the Kiwi public. There was some interesting stuff too. There were some areas where I think they could have made some political points with their traditional supporters. For example, I'd heard some scuttlebutt about what was going to happen to Radio New Zealand and that there was going to be a really big cut. And there is a cut, but it's about 7% over 4 years. And there was an opportunity there, small amount of money, but there was an opportunity to say to their supporters, "Hey, look, we're dealing to these guys for you," and they didn't do that.
But the thing is, they're not dealing. The thing about this budget, they're dealing to no one. They're dealing to they're not dealing to any issues or dealing to anything really at all. Interesting though, the means testing stuff that's starting to come through now. So the approach on welfare, and the means testing. Treasury made a speech earlier this year. The Secretary of Treasury made a speech earlier this year, and threw out the idea of means testing, a lot more benefits. And I reckon this government, if it gets another term, this is where it's going. This is the early testing of the market, and you watch it come in other areas.
It's bigger than that, though, and there's a line in the sand between traditional left-wing politics, which is about universalism.
Correct.
And I don't think that's a big surprise to anybody, which is this idea that you tax people more, but that everybody gets the benefit, or whatever benefit society and the government's offering.
The Chloe approach.
Versus conservative governments, which basically say if you don't need it, you don't get it. And you only get it if you absolutely require it, which personally is my political perspective as well. So that stuff resonates with me. I think that's fantastic. I think that there's a big chunk of this country who'll say that's what we should always have been doing. But as you say, the really big elephant in the room is around superannuation,
really
which
is.
they're not proposing to touch,
Yeah.
And that dwarfs everything else.
You can save 7% at Radio New Zealand. You can save 7% on Maori Bordens. It doesn't mean jack. The spend on super is $27 billion effectively. Add welfare and it's $50 billion. Okay, so it's a third of the spend. Today's third of the spend, 2 items. If you don't mess with that, you might as well give up on the other stuff, because to make big changes, you need to make big changes to big things.
Yeah, but this is what I don't have a problem with Kiwisaver, right?
It's nothing.
Government for, employer for, because by the time our children, our young kids are 65, it's going to look a hell of a lot different. And if they've got $1 million or $2 million in the bank in today's money, that just makes it so much easier. But it makes it easier for government.
I don't think it's aggressive enough. Well, I don't think it's ambitious enough. I think it should have been 4, 5, 6.
Australia's fantastic. The other thing I would say, Doug, is there's nothing in here for the regions. And New Zealand First has been famous about getting money in for the regions. There's a $200 million gas fund that Jones is, that Jones obviously got across the line. But there's nothing even close to provincial growth fund or anything like that encourages investment in the regions. Quite surprising.
I've just
think?
Yeah, sorry.
Remember, this is midterm budget. So if you're going to do a budget that's boring, this is the time that you do it.
Yeah.
Do we think that they're keeping their powder dry for a big budget next year, which is going to offer some lollies to?
They have to. Yeah. And that's why they'll put money aside. There's money aside. Have a look at there's money aside. There's also money aside for pay equity schemes too.
Yeah, but you look at the spending, you look at the debt track, in real terms and as a percent of GDP, it's going up. You look at the spending, it's going up. If they have an election year splurge, then I don't know where the money's coming from. Mind you, but
continued savings. Right? Continued savings. Yeah, they'll do that.
Maybe, but Labor hasn't come out. I note that Chris Hickman's hasn't come out and said we will reinstate pay equity as it was pre this new bill, because he understands how expensive that would be.
Well, he hasn't asked Te Pāti Māori and Chloe yet what to do, so he needs to wait for that. I don't know. I think I'm disappointed that this. I should be used to this by now. It's a midterm budget, as Ashley says quite rightly, but there's nothing big and shiny in that you can go, ooh, that. Michael Cullen's Kiwisaver scheme is totally different now compared to what he set up on that bit of refill paper back in 2000 or whatever. So where's the big thing today that you can say, oh, it's a classic national midterm budget, which is a little bit of everything.
Yeah, but
as I say, if you were going to point to anything, you'd point to that depreciation change. That's 6.6.
That's going to rock the people on the buses and the trains tonight. They're going to be talking about that for weeks.
Hey, Doug, the other thing I would say is this means testing, it does consume me a little bit. If you've got three kids and you're earning 150,000, three kids and a mortgage, $150,000 in Auckland, you're not nearly as wealthy as someone earning 100,000 with no kids living in Hawke's Bay, for example.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really, and when you means test, you can't segment by region, for example. So we've got to be really, really careful, because if for 150,000, there's a lot of people who are earning that, sounds like a lot of money, but they do not feel wealthy at all.
No, and I know this. I'm someone in Auckland. My kids have grown up a bit more now, and I earn a lot less than I have done in previous years. And I can tell you, even 200 grand in Auckland, I don't want this to sound, I'm going to get in trouble here, but it goes so quickly. Housing costs, costs of living, cost of just getting around. It's a big city. There are big city costs, and the cost is still going up, by the way, too. You've seen that in food. So you're right.
And I can hear a lot of people around the country playing their violins.
I know.
Hey, actually, have you put your invoice in for appearing on Duncan's show? Make them look good.
I must say, I'll just go down and get the buckets of money. Hang on. No, but look. I'm not saying I won the bones of my ass. I'm not saying that. But
no, I know we make the point.
150 grand's the new 60. The old 60
but
grand.
saying you're going to means test parents for 18 and 19-year-olds. Okay, what do? You say, okay, if mum and dad has a household income of over 150K and your kid hasn't got a job, he gets nothing. So what are they going to do?
Send him to work.
Unemployment is going to reach 5.4% next year. Yeah. A lot of those unemployed will be young people. If they can't get a benefit because mum and dad, quote unquote, earn too much, there's two things they do. They go back home, right? They lose their independence, or they end up doing activities which we really don't want them to be doing. I don't have to explain what that is. But
what is that, Stuart?
But you're entering dangerous territory where you means test 18 or 19-year-olds.
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
Well, no, we did 18. No, we did 18 a few years back. 18 they were doing in education a few years back. But I just say I like it. It forces them to get off their ass. The old man will say, "Get out of here, get a job." In Australia, they have to do it. Eh?
Here's a huge generalization. If you are earning that sort of money or anything approaching that, and you're means tested and you're looking after your kids and they're not getting a benefit, here's the generalization, you are far more likely to be the sort of person who's going to give your kids a kick up the backside and actually get them out there looking for a job, as opposed to somebody who's on a lower income. And that's perhaps a little unfair, but it's probably.
I think we've been too soft on welfare. And because no one even wants to have the debate because they want to look mean. In Australia, when you leave school, you've got to work for 6 months before you can sign up to the dole, and you can't sign up for the dole till you're 21. And the Aussies just do that, no problems. But we here feed these guys with a dole, and they're on it for 22 years when they leave school. That's what the research says. 22 years they have interaction with the Ministry of Social Development. That's shocking.
The other interesting thing about this is that so Willis has talked over the last couple of years about this thing called the structural deficit, and it's this argument, rightly or wrongly, that Robertson basically put in place a structure that was almost impossible to dismantle, whereby we were going to have deficits well into the future. Her argument is that by taking the measures that she's taking, she's going to reduce that. The claim that she's making, and take this with a grain of salt, but the claim that she's making at the moment is that by 2029 there'll be a $200 million surplus, and then that will grow over the following years. So be interesting to see what that looks like, but that's what she's battled. That's what she's trying to achieve.
That $200 million surplus, it is not worth the paper it's written on. $200 million, this many years out. I mean, that's like saying $5 is worth something.
Exactly.
You guys remember, I think they were projecting in 1989 under Rogernomics a $189 million surplus. I think Cargill was the Minister of Finance at the time, and that was derided by everybody at the time as being nonsense. So it'll be interesting to see how this is treated.
But English, he had a $200 million surplus when he came out of that big decade of deficits too, that Stewie's lot left them. So...
we got thrown COVID, and I think we did a pretty good job out of that.
Oh, there's that violin again.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it.
But back to your point, Dunk, I mean, it is a midterm budget. We do buy into that, so we didn't expect an election spurge. Yeah. But there's just nothing in here that isn't your typical national managerial budget. Don't really listen to what's going on. It's just about business as usual, and I don't think it shows a really great understanding of the economic issues we're facing.
And even the Kiwisaver stuff, it's 1% over 3 years that you have to put extra in. 1% for the employer, 1% for the worker. By the time you get to that 3 year period, you needed to now be putting in 6. The Aussies are now at 12.
Yeah.
We're so far. But what sort of standard of living do we want? These tough questions are never being answered by any of these governments. But they say they're going to look at it. If they get to office, it's all too hard, Ashley,
Well, it's the optics of the, and let's be fair, and I know that you guys won't necessarily agree, but we've got a media at the moment who are not fans of this government, and so the optics of the sort of stuff that the Aussies are getting away with would be much more difficult to do. So, for example, if they'd come in and said, "Hey, we're going to increase Kiwisaver contributions to 10%," that would have been the centre point of all publicity and media over the next few weeks, and they would have been derided for the fact that they were trying to steal this money from people in tough times. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Until we get some more balance in media, and I know I keep harping on about that every time we talk, but until we get some more balance in media and we get a centre-right rump that's prepared to actually deal with these issues analytically, these guys are continually going to be in.
I mean, have you listened to ZB recently? Have you listened to Mike Hosking?
But that's interesting you say that, because the ZB hosts are my kind of people, but the newsrooms as woke as the rest of the country.
Yeah, no, they are. The newsroom and the host are miles apart, and I reckon it's all very well to criticise this government and say that they're hopeless, and I've been one of those doing that. But I tell you what, they're the best of a bunch that could do it, because the other guys would be an absolute tragedy for the country.
Hey, but look, let's celebrate some things. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of education. I would have loved to have been the Minister of Education. I really, really would. And I've got some stories to tell about, my kids and what I think was a failed educational experiment. I do like what Erica Stanford's done in education. I think she's worked really hard, and she's got back to basics, and she's got a lot of money in this budget.
She has.
We talked about this. I think her $100 million around maths is fantastic.
Yep.
Mitch has got quite a lot in policing.
Yeah.
It worries me when we're building prisons to hold more prisoners. I know I'm going to piss off the far right.
You let too many
this,
out, though. You let too
well,
many out.
No. Those who pose a threat, those who have committed crimes of violence should be in prison, but those who pose no threat to society but have committed crimes, you put an ankle brace around them and you keep them at home.
Well, I was at the Auckland Run It Straight competition last night. I don't know if you heard about this Run It Straight thing where these big thugs run into each other. So it was my son said to me at 7 o'clock last night, "Oh, this is on. Can you take me, Dad?" And I said, "This is nutcase stuff, mate. This is I'm all into tackling hard and everything, but this is." Two guys, grown men, big guys, wearing ankle bracelets, by the way, got knocked the hell out, and they went to stand up and they went back again, and they're trying to hold them up. And we have all these rules in society, health and safety, yet that thing's allowed to take place. Like it's basically like alleged manslaughter in front of your face.
I have to say, I actually find that kind of refreshing.
Yeah, no, I agree. No. I sat in the grandstand. I was the only white guy there, and going, woohoo! I don't know what it is, but we were looking at guys getting knocked out, and it was kind of fun. What's happened to me? What's happened to us?
Look, it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where the last guy's promised a trip to Tahiti and he ends up rotting in some sort of jail.
Totally.
That may be a very effective way of getting rid of prison numbers, but I think there are
Running Man, that was called.
The Running Man, that's right. But it's just debt's increasing. Gross debt goes from $176 billion in 2024 to $283 billion. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. Come back to what I said before, though, Stuart. It's important to understand as a percentage of GDP, it's hardly changed. Yeah. It's really important. Anybody who watching this who doesn't understand that, so your total debt can increase, but the more important figure is what that is as a percentage of what the country produces.
What's your voodoo economics, Stu?
Total borrowings go from 59.7% of GDP to 67.7% of GDP.
Yeah,
that's total borrowing. Yeah. So 250 million up to 250 billion to 354 billion.
There's some repayment in there, though, because the total, and I don't want to confuse people with our two sets of figures, but the total is debt at 185 billion currently, which is 42.7% of GDP. Debt in 4 years' time in 2029 at 238 billion, as you said before, but 45% of GDP. So in the order of around about the same amount. And that's actually really important because to contrast that against where Bill English had us in 2017, which you will know better than me, Stu, but I think we're sitting at around 19% of GDP. So that's how much that position's deteriorated over
Michael Cohen had us below 10% of GDP.
Different times. Yeah. Can I just, to pinch a Chloe Swarbrick line, can I just say that all these numbers are credible because we've run them by Infometrics economists in Wellington. So we've put these through a credible agency. Yeah. And they've said it's fine. And now, if you want any more detail, I'll get back to you. I'll talk to my people and we'll give you we'll furnish you with the details.
Yeah, no, totally. That's scary. That's scary.
She also
Good old Jack
said.
Tane.
She also said, "Oh, he did well. He's good. He's at top of his game." She also said this was it was a really complex policy, but she's really pleased with how clear it's come out. Well, what is it? Because is it clear or is it complex? You know, she was just throwing C words around. Even got the C word stuff last week going on. You know, and so she was.
That's outrageous. But back to this budget, you know, Nicola gives a good speech. She really does. She answers questions really, really well. And if she gets a hard question, she's always got a go-to place to do it. So if you watch Nicola explaining complex concepts, or you listen to her talk about the budget, you go, yeah, okay, I like it. She's got it. But then when you drill down into the numbers, you look at the actual policies, it tells a slightly different story. So it's the same with David Seymour, right?
Yeah.
You'll notice in the budget documents, they've had to claw back some stuff around charter schools because it's not being spent. Everything David Seymour touches turns to mediocrity, whether it's charter schools, whether it's lunches in schools, whether it's treaty principles bill. That guy's about to become our deputy prime minister.
Yeah.
Wow.
What's happened?
Interestingly, because there's been an increase, Stu, in subsidies to private schools, so I suspect that swaps between one and the other. What I found interesting, and you might be able to explain this to me, Stu, because I couldn't find it, and I'm just a simple man. Couldn't see anything in there on defence spending, on the specifics of defence spending. So I know that they
don't know.
Several announcements.
They don't know.
No,
So
they have said they've said planes and. But what we do know is spending on planes, tanks, guns, and soldiers is more important than making sure that women earn the same amount as men.
That's a Labour tagline.
All those women out there, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You're going to be protected with our planes and tanks and guns and soldiers.
But women are in the defence forces too, so they might get a better pay. And you see, you just don't know.
Well, if you have a look in the documents, it talks about a whole lot of savings for defence personnel that aren't critical.
Here's the truth about this. Here's the truth about the winners in defence. 2 weeks ago, I was put in the same room as a very senior Navy guy because we were staying at the same house. He was shocked to see that I was there, and I said, "Well, you're here now. I'm going to lock you here. I'm going to kind of pile you with questions." And by the end of the weekend, I got out of him that the real winners in the defence spend will be that they don't know what they need. They know what they need, but they don't know which and where to get it from. There'll be some consultants which will be paid up to potentially $150 million over the lifetime of the spend to tell them what they need. So the winners will be based in an office somewhere in Wellington or Sydney.
Judith, there's a new consultancy called Nash, Church, Garner, Inc. Incorporated. If it's $150 million, we can tell you whatever you want to be told.
Look, I'll undercut Nash, to be honest.
Reports produced by AI.
Yes.
GPT.
Yes. No, Nash, he's with New Zealand First, Judith, but I'm happy to. Ashley and I, we've got our own. We'll do it for a third of that. We'll do it for a third of that. Yeah. Okay, guys. Hey, we'll wrap it up there. Brilliant. I think that isn't it interesting that we've spoken about some of the main things, and that's about it, really, isn't it?
That is about it. That's the disappointing thing. There was no big lolly.
So unfortunately, people are going to turn off this podcast and go, "What did those guys say? I mean, what did they take out of this budget?"
Oh, we better start again then. We never want them to say what did they say?
Education's good. Nothing for the regions. Very little for business. Health, okay, not too bad. Hold on.
Why didn't you say that at the beginning? We could have saved 20 minutes.
He's all over the show. He's Robin Hood economics. There's one number that's not in the budget, and that's and you guys have had a say on this too. And it's 3.1 million hits on YouTube or views on YouTube of this podcast in 3 months.
Wow,
it's a really good number.
There you go.
Mother's been busy.
3.1 million. You guys are on a number of these podcasts, but something's happening there.
The ones that didn't file.
Yeah. Well, I go around to houses now and I force people to watch it. Otherwise,
they show it in all the prisons. Did you know that Robert Mugabe was a cricketing expert? And the reason he was is because the British used to pipe cricket commentary into his cell as a form of torture. So he came out, never having watched a game of cricket, but knew all about it. Was an expert. Loved it.
I was lynched by one of his henchmen at a Commonwealth Heads of Government conference in Nigeria. Sean Plunkett and I, we saw him in a foyer of the lobby of the hotel. So we made our move to go and interview him, and these two
and here with us today to tell the tale.
Two massive guys in the back of my neck. I was out. How's that?
Good.
Yeah, they didn't stop to see if I was okay. Yes.
See, that will be the takeout of this podcast.
It may well be, as long as it's my takeaway, Stu. Yeah. Okay, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
We'll do it again. Cheers, guys. Good fun. Okay.
See you next time, guys.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
All right, they're always good, those guys. Always great to have a chat with them, and we will continue to use them as a political panel. I think they're really clear and concise, and they know what they're talking about. And Stu, of course, has been on the inside. Tomorrow, we want to continue our budget discussion, how this affects you in your household. So this is more the Kitchen Table Economics. Francis Cook, podcaster, and Hannah McQueen from Enable Me. They will join us tomorrow in the studio so we can get into that nitty-gritty of what it really means for your household, and we'll crunch some numbers with Hannah McQueen. She's so good at numbers, so we'll have a chat to them. We want your questions as well. So if you've got any questions regarding the budget, especially for Hannah or for Francis, then send them to me right now. Duncan Garner. What's my email? Duncan Garner at rover.nz? Or was it Duncan at rover.nz? Duncan at Rover. Okay, Duncan at rover.nz. Okay, if you do Duncan Garner, then it will bounce back. So just do Duncan at rover.nz. Send me your questions, and I'll make sure that we get them in front of Hannah McQueen and Francis Cook. She's a really good podcaster, Francis. Her stuff is top class. She's done really well with it too, and it's sort of kitchen table economics. She explains complex ideas and things, so she'll be great. Hannah McQueen has been great with numbers, and she'll help you out there too. Any questions, send them to me, Duncan at rover.nz. Thanks so much for following the podcast. Remember, we live in one of the best places on earth, so get out and enjoy it. Have a great rest of the evening, and don't forget to get questions to us as well. Duncan at rover.nz. See, I got that one right. A mind like a steel trap. Catch you tomorrow. Hello.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.